Thank you, Debbie. I saw a list of jokes recently that you might be able to identify with. They all started this way: you might be a Baptist if. All right, so you might be a Baptist if you think God's presence is always felt strongest in the back three pews. You might be a Baptist if you have never sung the third verse of any hymn. You might be a Baptist if you can quote Robert's Rules of Order but not the Ten Commandments. This is my favorite one. You might be a Baptist if you're old enough to get the senior citizen discount at a restaurant but not old enough to promote into a senior adult Sunday school class. Or you might be a Baptist if you clapped in church last Sunday and felt guilty about it all week. Well, all of those jokes have, I suppose, their genesis in an album that was released in 1993. And whether you knew the album or had the album or not, it's almost certain that you're familiar with it. It was produced by comedian Jeff Foxworthy. And it's crazy. That album was so successful, it went triple platinum, was number 38 on the Billboard Top 200. So the 38th most popular album in the country in 93 was a comedy album. But Jeff Foxworthy's shtick, you might be familiar with, was a whole series of jokes that started with the statement, you might be a redneck if. All right? And so you might be familiar with some of these. You might be a redneck if you list beginner's luck as a job skill on your employment application. You might be a redneck if the family business requires a lookout. You might be a redneck if you've ever had to haul a can of paint to the top of a water tower to defend your sister's honor. You might be a redneck if you spent 40 hours a week at Walmart but do not work there. And you might be a redneck if you think airing your dirty laundry means that you walk to work. So anyway, some of those are funnier than others, and you're familiar, and there's a whole slew of jokes that work on that same formula, that you might be this, if that. And most of the time, all these things are of little or almost no concern. Somebody calls you a redneck, big deal. Somebody calls you a Baptist, big deal. And so these things don't matter. But let me ask you this. If, as someone that says, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus, if someone says, you, my friend, are a Pharisee, or if someone says, man, you are acting like a Pharisee, how would that make you feel? I mean, would you feel that that's a positive thing? Have they said something that is befitting you? Are they saying something that is a compliment? Now, odds are you would say, absolutely not. I would hate for someone to call me a Pharisee. Now, because that word has some meaning, it has some context to you if you've had any exposure to the New Testament at all, and you're aware that if someone were to call you a Pharisee, at the very least, they're saying a couple of things. One, they are saying that you are religious, but they're saying you're religious in ways that are not positive. It's not a compliment. And so if someone says, hey, you are a Pharisee, or you're acting like a Pharisee, what would you want to do? Odds are you'd want to stop it. Whatever it is that's creating that reception in the mind or heart of someone else, you would want to stop that. So here's the question. How can you tell if you are one? How can I tell if I'm operating like a Pharisee? For the past few weeks, we've been working our way through Luke's Gospel, and what we're looking at are specific instances where Jesus shares a meal with people. And at the beginning of the series, we noted this, that when you share a meal with someone, these tend to be very instructive. They reveal things to you about them to you, and they reveal things to you about them. And so as we have record of these instances where Jesus is sharing a meal with people, these become very telling. They share some information, not only about those that are present, but if we pay attention, they reveal things about us. And today what we're going to see in a meal that Jesus shared with a Pharisee, you can identify you might be a Pharisee if what? Look with me in your Bibles to Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11, we're going to start reading with verse 37. Luke 11, starting with verse 37, we are told that as Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So Jesus went in and reclined at the table. When the Pharisee saw this, he was amazed that he did not first perform the ritual washing before dinner. But the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and evil. Fools! Didn't he who made the outside make the inside too? But give from what is within to the poor, and then everything is clean for you. But woe to you Pharisees! You give a tenth of mint, rue, and every kind of herb, and yet you bypass justice and love for God. These things you should have done without neglecting others. Now, what Jesus goes on to say, I would encourage you to read all the way down through the end of this chapter, and you see more that Jesus has to say. But even in just these few verses, Jesus, I believe, gives us the answer to this question: how is it that I can tell if I am operating like a Pharisee? And again, that's important because hopefully I'd want to stop that. Now, before we begin to answer that question, let's think about what's going on in terms of context. Jesus' public ministry is in full swing, and everywhere that he goes, people by increasingly large numbers want to gather to hear what he has to say, to see what it is that he might do. Maybe he will perform another miracle. And so as he is going around, just the average Joe on the street, they are, at the very least, curious. They want to see and observe and hear for themselves what Jesus may be saying or doing. And it wasn't simply they who were showing up at these, but also the religious establishment. And some of them were showing up because they've heard about Jesus, and he's operating in what they think is their purview, and so they want to find out what's going on. And so some are curiosity seekers. Some have begun to hear things that Jesus has said, and they take issue with them. Some of them have already made up their minds that they can't stand Jesus, and they're looking for some reason, some way to be able to say, hey, this guy is a charlatan, and you should pay no attention to him whatsoever. And so Jesus at this point has been teaching, and in the crowd it seems that there is a Pharisee. Now, in the first century, Judaism was effectively divided, at least the leadership, within two primary sects. You had the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And there were a number of differences between the two. Perhaps the greatest of them is that Pharisees maintained a belief in the afterlife while Sadducees didn't. So for me, the easiest way to remember that is that Pharisees believed in a resurrection, Sadducees didn't. That's why they were sad, you see. Anyway, write that down. Anyway, so that was a distinction. But the other thing is that both of these groups took very, very, very seriously the law of God. Now, when you hear that phrase, the law of God, probably you're thinking, and you should be thinking, back to the law as it was given to people through Moses. And so the law of God, law of Moses, essentially the same thing, except for this fact. The law of God did not give details about a whole slew of things. For example, we've talked about this before. The law, for example, prohibited work on the Sabbath day. But then it left kind of open to interpretation what exactly constitutes work. And so where there were absences of detail, what happened is that over time there began to be this oral tradition or the rabbinical law that began to fill in the gaps to say, all right, the law says this, and so we're going to fill in all the detail and add, so that gives us level 1, and we're going to give A through Z as the subset underneath that. And so the Pharisees especially loved all of that. And while both groups were very zealous law keepers, it was the Pharisees that really elevated this oral law, this rabbinical law, to the same level effectively as Scripture, as the law that was given by God. And so these were very, very, very religious people. This guy that has invited Jesus to share a meal is a very, very religious guy, and he is very serious about that. Now, while all of those things are true, again, let's go back to the beginning question, which is this. If someone were to call you a Pharisee, would you say, well, thank you? No, you would be like, oh, I hate that. I wish that weren't the case, because that is not a compliment. You would not want that to be said of you. And so again, how is it that we can identify this in ourselves so that we make sure that that is not found? Based on this meal that was shared with Jesus, I believe he answers that question this way. First of all, that you might be a Pharisee if you think good covers make good books. You might be a Pharisee if you think that good covers make good books. As this passage unfolds, in verse 37, this Pharisee asks Jesus to share a meal with him. Now, what his motivations were, we have no idea. Was he a curiosity seeker where he was trying to just find out a little more about Jesus? Was he a skeptic that was looking to somehow trap Jesus? We have no idea. All we know is that he invites Jesus to share a meal, and it seems that the meal is probably at his house. So Jesus goes, and we are told that Jesus goes in and he reclined at the table. Now, the table was probably a table that was on the floor. And so if you're reclining, especially in a more formal situation, there would be pillows around it, and you would recline and lean over to the side because the mealtime was not something that would be just a few moments, just a few minutes. This would have gone on for an extended period of time. Now, what is unclear is whether or not Jesus washes his hands at all. I know how the NIV translates this passage. It suggests or implies that Jesus did not wash his hands at all. I don't necessarily believe that's the case. What is clear, though, is that the Pharisee notes that Jesus did not, according to verse 38, he did not first perform the ritual washing. What is the ritual washing? I mean, I thought it'd be just sufficient if you wash your hands, or if you're like our boys, if you just do that. That would be, that's something. So what is a ritual washing? Well, according to the Pharisees, the ritual washing, in fact, not just the ritual washing, but the right way to wash is that, first of all, you would pour water that would go from just below the elbow down. So you'd be kind of rinsing off, and then you would take this hand, a closed fist, and use it to scrub all of this. And once you've done that, then you go over to the other hand and do vice versa. And then you rinse again from the elbow down. That's not simply the ritual way, that's the right way. Why? Because that's how we've always done it. We've made this rule, we said that's how it is. And he notices that Jesus does not do that. This Pharisee, he does. All those of his ilk do that. And he notices that Jesus doesn't. And it seems very clear that Jesus is aware. He's paying attention to what's going on, and he realizes this Pharisee has a problem with that. Now, it doesn't seem at all that the Pharisee says, aren't you going to wash your hands the typical way? He doesn't say anything at all. Nevertheless, Jesus addresses him in verse 39. Have you ever had people that don't need to say something? They just kind of give you that look, and you just know what they're thinking? It seems that this Pharisee was one of those people. That he just, the look that he gave, that told Jesus everything that he needed to know. And that this guy, though very, very religious, was not just part of the group of the Pharisees, but he had the heart of a Pharisee. And so Jesus begins to respond to that in verse 39. And he says, you Pharisees, this is how you operate. You clean the cup, the outside of the cup, and the dish, but inside you're full of greed and evil. So imagine that you've got a coffee cup. And so what you guys do is that you wash the outside, but inside it's just full of just stains. Inside it's full of old coffee with creamer that has curdled. So that's how you're operating, and he's using a dish to represent their lives. And he's saying, you're really concerned about making sure that the outside is washed, and we got to do this the right way, elbow down, fist, we got to do that. So you're very concerned about that, but what's on the inside, you do not seem to care about at all. Put another way, it seems that you're operating under this premise: good covers. Well, that makes a good book. Now, I was thinking about books based on this, books and book covers that over the years have caught my attention. In fact, and I've bought a lot of books over the years, but I would say there is only one book that I ever bought because of its cover. And it was written and released. In fact, I was anxious for it to be released. I was starting my senior year of high school. It was in 1992, and Max Lucado came out with a book called And the Angels Were Silent. I thought that was a killer title. And it's about the last week of Jesus' earthly life and ministry. And the cover is black, and there is a partial view of the earth, and then how the colors of how it does, the title, the subtitle, everything. I'm telling you, it just drew me in. And so as soon as that book hit the shelves, back when you could still buy a book in a Christian bookstore because they still existed, I got that book. And I was super excited to get this. I loved it. And again, the reason I bought it is because of the cover. In truth, since 1992, I have never recommended that book to anyone. Why is that? It had a great cover. It had an excellent cover. It had a killer title. It had a great premise. But in the end, I've never recommended that book to anyone because, candidly, I didn't think the book was very good. I don't think it added a whole lot to anything. I didn't care for it. It was not the worst thing I've ever read. I just didn't think it was very good. And so in the end, what matters? What constitutes a good book? Well, it's what's on the inside. It's what's on the inside that determines whether the book is actually good. The cover, well, it's decorative. It'd be nice to have a great cover, but in the end, what really matters is what's going on the inside. And you say, well, Michael, of course I knew that. I mean, did you have to go to school? Did you have to attend a class to figure that out? We all kind of know that that's the case, that what's on the inside really matters. It's strange that so many times we know these things, but we still operate with a differing perspective. We know that it's what's on the inside that counts, but yet we consistently and regularly demonstrate that the outside seems to matter more. And you say, well, Michael, how in the world could that be possible? Certainly that would not be me. Let me ask you this. Now, for those of you that are here in person today, first of all, let me say thank you for being here. Glad you're here. For those of you that are watching online, glad that you're watching at home. And it's likely, though, that some folks watching at home don't look quite like some of you seated here, at least in how you're dressed. But those of you that are here and you're dressed, you got up this morning, likely that you took a shower, that you washed your hair, that you soaked your teeth, that you did whatever it is that you had to do to get here. And so, but you've gotten dressed, you might have had to press some clothes, you did whatever you did to get here today. Let me ask you this. In terms of getting ready for worship, how much time was spent preparing the outside of you? You got that in mind? By contrast, how much time was spent preparing the inside of you? I mean, it's likely. It's more than possible. In fact, it's certain. I think if we're honest, most. All we did was prepare the outside. Why is that? Because we can understand and know the right thing and still not operate based in that. See, Pharisees understood, yeah, of course, and they would agree. The inside of the book, that's what makes a good book, yet they operated with the principle that good covers make good books, and that's false. That's false. It's what's on the inside that counts. That's why Jesus later said, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And it's very possible to be very, very, very religious and to take a whole slew of rules very, very, very seriously, yet your heart be very, very, very far from God, operating under a completely false premise that it's the outside that counts, that good books are determined by good covers when they're not. You might be a Pharisee if you think good covers make good books. But he gives another litmus test, and I believe it's this. You might be a Pharisee if you think, I'm okay, you're... Who cares? You might be a Pharisee if you think, oh, I'm okay, you're... Well, who cares? Who cares? Now, you're not looking, obviously, at what we read this morning, at the totality of everything that Jesus says. And you could continue to read all the way down through verse 52. Jesus goes on to go on a lengthy diatribe against how it is that the Pharisees are operating, castigating them that while they are very, very religious, these are people that on the inside, as it relates to God, they are completely checked out. And so this Pharisee invited Jesus to share a meal. And this is a guy that his life would have very much revolved around what went on at the temple and in the synagogue. Every day would have been actively spent involving God and the thoughts of Scripture into his mind and reciting things and thinking about all of these rules. The problem, though, first of all, is that his focus was entirely on the outside. It was completely external. But then the problem gets exacerbated by what you see in verse 42. Jesus says, this is how you guys operate. That you'll give a tenth of mint, rue, and every kind of herb. So it says that you give a tenth. Now when you see that word, what does that mean to you? It means a tithe. Well, where did this whole tithing thing come from in the first place? Well, God gave that. I mean, tithing is a God-instituted practice. And so you've got this guy that is tithing, but it's not simply that he's tithing income, that he works and he sells things, or he makes things and he sells them, and from that he gives to the collection, that he gives a tenth of the first of that which comes in. It's not simply that he does that, but it's even down to his spices. I went to Harris Teeter and I got a thing of pepper, and so there are 16 ounces of pepper, so I will put 1.6 ounces of pepper in the collection plate. I bought some mint leaves. I've got 100 of them, so I will be dutifully giving 10 of my mint leaves. And I've got some jalapenos, and I will gladly give 1/10 of all of my jalapenos. So everything, down even to the very spices. Obviously, Jesus is using hyperbole here. It's the intended use of exaggeration for effect. And he's saying that's how you operate. You and so many just like you are so concerned about this. Tithing even spices, but what does he say? At the very same time, you bypass. You completely skip. You go around what? Justice and love for God. You go around justice and love for God. Now, justice is a term that is used quite frequently in our modern American culture. Unfortunately, justice is a term that is being redefined by our culture as the word love has actually been redefined. So when this text uses the term justice, what exactly is in view? Well, let me just give you Michael's take on this, or my interpretation or my definition of the word. That when we're talking about justice, that we are talking about that rendering to others that which they are due. So that how I deal with you, how I deal with others, that I am giving to them, I am rendering to them that which they are due. But when we are additionally talking about, as followers of God, acting justly towards others and demonstrating justice towards others, it is not simply that we are rendering to them that which they are due, but also that we are treating others, that we are viewing others, and that we are valuing them in the manner that God does. So that God deals with us justly. And that if I am practicing godly justice as a follower of Christ, I am dealing with you, I am operating with you, I am interacting with you, I am responding, and I am even valuing you as God does. Now, this does not mean that we excuse bad behavior or choices, or that we do not impose consequences. It does mean, however, that we treat people, all of them, with fairness, with equity, that we understand individuals' intrinsic worth, value, and dignity, because everybody, every person that is, has, or will exist is a person created in the image of God. And that understanding, that awareness stays on the front burner of our mind and undergirds all of our interactions with them. So it's not simply that we deal with people rendering to them that which that they are due, but we are dealing with people, viewing them as creations made by God in His image, intrinsically valuable, intrinsically worthy, intrinsically deemed by God worthy of Jesus giving His life so that we could be in relationship, so that they could be in relationship with God. So if you take all of that and dump it back into this passage, Jesus says, listen, how you and those of your ilk are operating is that you are like, let me give you, here's some mint leaves, and here's a teaspoon of cinnamon. Forgot that. I bought some of that at Food Lion the other day. It was on Vic Special. Let me put 1/10 of cinnamon. Oh, it's Thanksgiving. I have some extra sage. Let me put some of that in there as well. You are concerning yourself with that level of tithe, but you're completely bypassing what? Justice, how you're dealing with others. And what? He links something. He says you bypass justice and love for God. Isn't it interesting that those two are linked together, that they come as a set? Now, why do you think that is? I believe because one precedes the other. That love for God precedes justice. And that where one is absent, the other will be absent. So you've got a guy that's very religious. He's going to make sure that he's got perfect attendance in the synagogue, perfect attendance at sacrifice, perfect attendance at the Day of Atonement, but when it comes to other people, I'm okay. I'm doing my tithe. I'm following the rules. I'm dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And you, well, who cares? Why? Because in the end, I think there was a deficiency in their love for God. On what basis would I say that? This past Thursday was my birthday, and I know you have that date circled on your calendars, and you have reminders set on your phone and all that stuff. And so, anyway, this past Thursday was my birthday. I had to go to Charlotte, though, on Thursday to preach a funeral for a young lady I used to pastor. 39 years old. The previous Friday simply did not wake up. Terrible. It's tragic. But the weather forecast Wednesday night going into Thursday was terrible. And I have never been so grateful and so glad for forecasters to get it wrong. But seeing what that was going to be, I was concerned whether I could get out of town on Thursday morning. So after Bible study on Wednesday night, I went to Charlotte to stay at my mom's house so that I could just get up and go straight to the church to do the service on Thursday. When I got back home later on Thursday afternoon, when I get into the house, Catherine is very excited. And so she's glad to see me, but she is announcing that for my birthday, she has a play that she has prepared. A wonderful play. It's already scripted. There's pages of this. Of course, there's multiple pages because her letters are about this big. Anyway, so she's got these pages, and so once I kind of get settled, fine, I go to her room, and she's got a chair there for me, and Caroline comes in, Nathan comes in, and she's got props, she's got a flashlight in her closet shining on these animals, and so she starts this play, and I'm telling you, it was a production like you've never seen before. I mean, man, it was something. But it was absolute silliness. Absolute silliness. Is this a play that you would ever buy a ticket to? No. No, it was not. It was like when you hear the phrase silly little girl, that's exactly what this was. It was a production by a silly little girl. But I'm not lying. I watched it and had a smile on my face to the point that my eyes have tears in them. Why? Is it because it is so wonderful? No. Is it because I just love silliness? No. It's because I love that little girl. And she was doing something that mattered to me, that mattered to her. And because I love her, that which matters to her, it matters to me. Why in the world do you think justice, which has to do with how we deal with others, is linked to love for God? Because where one is deficient, the other one will be absent. And when we really love God, we're going to care for those that He cares for. We're going to look at as valuable those that God views as valuable. I don't know about, and I realize it's tough to do this, and we get so frustrated with other people, and people can get on our nerves, and they can press all of our buttons, and they can do all of those things. But what we all do well to do is to remind ourselves that person that is getting on our last nerves, that curmudgeon DMV worker, is somebody that God looked at and said they were worth Jesus giving His life for them. That will cause them to matter to us. And when they matter, we will never be operating with the notion, well, if I'm okay, who cares? We will not bypass justice. Why? Because of our love for God. At the outset, I said this. If someone were to say to you that you are a Pharisee or that you are operating like a Pharisee, you would hopefully take umbrage to that. And you would say, man, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be like that. Why in the world do you think the Lord has given us record of this interaction, these characteristics? Why did He ensure that we could have that? I think so that we could identify whether that's found in us, so that we might say, Lord, I don't want to be like that. Will you help me? Will you bow your heads with me? You might be a Pharisee if. Now, we've looked in this passage and seen a couple of ways that that's been answered. And it's possible just in walking through that you might have felt, at least in some small way, like you were looking in the mirror. And I don't mean to beat you over the head at all. I don't want to. But if you see that, if you feel that, I hope you realize that that's a problem. If you're a follower of Christ, it ought not be that way. It shouldn't be that way. But if it is, God can help that to change. But it's going to start by rekindling your affections. It's likely that you've grown distant in your relationship with the Lord. You've gotten further away. That doesn't mean that you've been less religious, that you hadn't been attending or hadn't been tithing. You could be doing all of those things, but your heart's still very, very far from the one who gave His life for you. As I'm talking, would you begin even now to say, Lord, help me to see if that's me? If it is, will you follow that up by saying, Lord, will you help me to change? I don't want that to be this way. Will you show me, will you burden me about making some steps back towards you? Will you help me to feel towards you like I used to? It's likely as you ask that, the Lord's going to help you see some junk that's present that needs to get out. If you're here, though, or if you're watching online, and you may say, you know what, I cannot say with any certainty at all that I have a personal relationship with the Lord, will you allow us to help you with that? If you're here in person, see me, see Jamie afterwards. We can help you. There are others that can help you. If you're watching online, will you reach out to us? Will you contact us? And I promise you, we'll help you experience it. Because I'm telling you, it'll change everything. And it'll give you a relationship with God where, yes, you'll be religious, but not religious in a way where it doesn't count, where it's of no use, where it's a negative. But where you realize your value to God and the value of others, that you deal with them, that you deal with Him accordingly. As the Lord is speaking to you now, will you just be honest, candid? Take these moments just to say to Him what He's encouraging you to say right now. Lord, it's a lot easier to sing or even play the song that Karen has just been playing, Change My Heart, O God. But the truth is, every one of us deals spiritually with chronic heart issues. And even when we get things fixed, it's possible that with the passage of time, and sometimes not even much of it, that we begin to develop some heart problems again. And it's these heart problems that produce action problems, because what's down in the well eventually comes up in the bucket. Lord, help us to be those that are your followers and that people know it, and they realize that we are different, that we're serious about following you, but that we're not indifferent to them because you're not. That we realize that, yes, there are practices that you want us to avoid and things that you want us to do. But it's not simply that we concern ourselves with doing the right things, but that the right condition is going on in our hearts. Or there's things that only you, through the Holy Spirit, can show us on the inside. There's things that only you can do works that you can accomplish on the inside. And I pray that each of us present ourselves as a willing place for you to work, so that no one would ever, if they were to allege us acting like a Pharisee, they'd never, ever be accurate. So Lord, that's our prayer. And as you have and are speaking to people, I pray that we would respond. We say this in Jesus' name. Amen. Listen, God bless you. Thank you for being here today. Let me just remind those of you and those of you that are connected or part of Gate City, that even if you're watching online, if you're part of the finance team, we'll be meeting this afternoon at 3 o'clock through Zoom. So just please remember that. I sent the email. If you've lost the Zoom link that I sent, just reach out to me and I can send that to you. Also, if you would remember Lizzie Nance. I baptized Lizzie, I believe it was this past January, maybe in December. But it's Wayne Nance's daughter, and she was engaged to a young man named Jake Merrill, and I was able to have a conversation, I believe it was back in early January, December, with Jake, where he made a decision to follow Christ. Unfortunately, Jake had some struggles, candidly, with drugs, and to make a long story short, 28 years old, Jake died on Thursday. And it's devastating, leaves behind a heartbroken, devastated fiance. And so we'll be passing on funeral arrangements once those are complete. But please remember them in your prayers. If you are someone that's here, or if you're someone here that's watching, let me just remind you of something that I hope that you know. There is help. There is absolutely help available. Big stuff is hanging in the balance, so don't squander that. We can help. We can point you to even more help, but please don't suffer in silence. And so please remember them in your prayers. But it is good to see you today. Those of you that are watching, again, thank you for joining us. And let me just encourage you. And I'm going to guard this. I'm not going to beat you over the head at all. Thank you for being here, but some of you who are watching, it's absolutely possible that you could be here. We're not operating in any way other than what I would describe as reasonably safe. We're operating with reason and caution, socially distancing and hand sanitizing and wearing masks, and people are aptly and appropriately spread apart. I am concerned because the longer you miss this, the less you will miss this. And this matters. And so I hope that guarding your health has not caused you to check out permanently from connecting with God's people, because it really does matter. But thank you for being here today. We're going to start with sections 1 and 3. 1 and 3, if you would be dismissed, and then 2 and 4, you can follow them.